Thank you for being here. Thank you for preferring listening to us and not go to lunch. Well, that is too much already. The objective of this talk is talking about the mining sector and the impact that economic emergency we have lived through in the year 2001, 2002 has had on the sector. To start with this talk, we can say that there was an impact, as in every sector of the Argentinian economy, but at least numbers show that the sector has grown steadily from the year 2003 to now. These numbers show what has been said in different presentations today, but sometimes it's important to stress it. In the year 2009, there are no official data. It's very similar data to those of the year 2008, a product of the economic crisis, the international economic crisis. You might remember that nobody can forget what happened in the year 2001, 2002. This is simply a brief review. And in connection to the exchange regime, you might recall the year 2001, 2002, a series of standards were applied that changed the economy of that time. Basically, the exchange rate is re-established, and the obligation of entering the currency by exports is re-established. Also, the obligation of paying export rights is re-established. That has a reason, is not by chance, not arbitrarily. My presentation is about exchange rates. I'm going to briefly talk about the payment of export rights. Why, again, the need to pay for export rights? Because that's a fiscal measure. You have to bear in mind that the tax collection in exports represents 12% of the total collection. Is very important. And then the need of reducing the currencies, because we knew that we're going the foreign currencies were going to enter through exports, and it is necessary to reduce those foreign currencies to maintain the value of it. That's related to the right of exports. Now let's analyze the exchange standards. In 2001, the exports could leave their currency abroad, and they had the obligation to bring them back to the country. They could not leave their dollars out of the country. And after that, it was not only necessary to bring the foreign currency back, but they had to convert them into pesos. That is what was called the negotiation and settlement of the foreign currency. And months later, and this is always in exports, months later, in September 2002, not only it was necessary to re-enter the export foreign exchange, but also the currency that the foreign currency that enters through funding or loans. Well, how does it impact? We had a law of mining investment in May 93. This law forces stability for the companies that were able to submit their feasibility studies. That stability is a tax stability, fiscal, custom, and exchange for 30 years. That is the stability. The question is, how did it impact the companies already had the stability? How did it impact for the new companies that wanted to acquire that stability, that applied for that stability? When we talk about stability, is the picture of the legal regime in terms of custom, taxes, and exchange at the moment you submit the study, not when you get the certificate. Is at the moment of the presentation. That picture will remain still and will be applied for those 30 years. Well, the companies that acquired the stability in the 90s said, I didn't pay rights, I didn't have to repatriate the currencies, the foreign currencies. What's my treatment? There were harsh discussions on that, and that took to the year 2003. 2 years, practically 2 years, 1 year and a half. the decree law was passed. That decree law says that those companies that were able to get the stability, that agreement, the stability agreement in the 90s, would maintain it in the exchange rate matters, that is the possibility of not repatriating foreign currencies because of exports. That applies for the companies that are already exporting, that are funding themselves with their own production. And those that did not obtain the stability during the 90s and that applied for and submitted the feasibility study later on with the emergency regime, what's the treatment for them? Well, there was a discussion, more discussions continued, and 1 year later, a decree in the 753 indicates that to avoid discrimination with those that do have the stability, the executive power recognizes that this is a very beneficial regime that has helped, that has fostered investment, and recognizes those companies that would obtain the stability after the year 2004, the possibility of doing the following: not only not to repatriate the foreign currency by export, but also not to repatriate the foreign currency by funding. So there is a difference. There is a difference compared the first decree law of the year 2003 and the decree law of the year 2004. Notice 2004 one is broader. It observes the benefits. It's wider. And the question is, there is a gap. There is a gap between the companies that got it in the year 2001 and the ones that got it in the year 2004. What's the treatment for the companies in that gap? Well, the companies that have stability between the year 93 and 2001, those that got the stability, are exempt of entering the foreign currency by imports. Those that obtained the stability after 2004 don't need to enter the foreign currencies, neither for export nor for funding. What happens with those that submitted the feasibility between the year 2001, 2002, and 2004? The legal picture is one where they are obliged to repatriate the foreign currency and they are obliged also to pay rights. So they are in a situation that is discriminatory, and the decree law of the year 04 considers that discrimination should be avoided between the companies that have a privileged regime. And, well, the questions I have just asked are those. But there's another question, a question we will analyze now in the next 2 slides, is the following. The companies that have stability, that enjoy stability, can export foreign currencies in foreign countries. But they have financial needs in Argentina. How can they enter those foreign currencies? What's the concept? Will it be an export? If they left the currency abroad for 1-2 years and they want to repatriate those currencies, what are the consequences of bringing that money back to Argentina? This is a summary of what I mentioned. The cut that was produced in the year 2001, 2002, the difference between the year 2000, from the year 2001 on, with the decree law of the year 2004. Let's talk about the legal reserve requirement. We have mentioned requirements up to the year 2004. In the year 2005, because of speculatory funds situation, the government decided to apply a measure that is related to the restriction to the repatriation of the currency, called legal reserve requirement, encaje in Spanish. 30% of the currency that comes from abroad has to be reserved. It's a requirement for reserve. How do those foreign currencies enter to the country? Sometimes this reserve applies, some others the legal reserve doesn't apply. It applies when you, as an Argentinian company, are receiving funds from a loan, from a financial loan. It applies when a non-resident, a foreign, wants to make a portfolio investment in Argentina. What is a portfolio investment? Is to buy shares, to buy stock, to buy titles that are traded in the local market, or to buy stocks, for example, for 5% of a closed society, a closed corporation. And finally, it requires the obligation to apply the legal reserve when you, the Argentinian companies, have savings abroad, for example, and want to bring them back to Argentina. If those savings are higher than $2 million over the surplus, the legal reserve will be applied. Now, why do we have these measures? As I said before, the basis was speculatory funds, and the exchange standards are monetary instruments, economic policy instruments that point towards maintain the value of the currency as a function of the economic needs. To regulate the value of the foreign exchange could be important. So when a high exchange rate is required for any reason, what do? They stop, they restrict the entrance, the incoming of the foreign currencies, to have a small amount of foreign currency in the market to increase the value, because the supply is less. In Argentina, we have difficulties to enter sometimes, and many restrictions to take the currency out. When you point to a low exchange, you foster the income and not the outlet. And here we have a mix. We have some restrictions to take the money in, some restrictions to take the money out. Now, the legal reserve requirement does not only apply in Argentina. Chile has had very similar standards for a long time. Brazil too. It's not a novelty. It's not a new instrument invented in Argentina. When doesn't it apply? It doesn't apply all the time. It's important to know which are the exceptions. It applies when we have loans that comply with certain requirements, loans that are given by multilateral credit organizations, or when we are funding external trade, foreign trade operations. There is no need for the reserve requirement. The important point then is to demonstrate the financial entity what kind of operation are we doing. Why? Because it is assumed that everything would be affected by the legal reserve requirement unless the contrary is demonstrated. When it's applied, when we are doing a direct investment like in real estate and in a repatriation of assets, when doesn't it apply? It does not apply when the objective is to invest. So it doesn't apply when you bring funds for investment. When you bring funds for investment, we can be subject to exception to the reserve requirement. Here, if you are receiving from foreign investors, if you're receiving capital from foreign investors to contribute to a society, provided it is more than 90%, we will find a possibility to avoid the legal reserve. We have also funds for the branches, for the buying and selling of real estate. And in the case of the loans, it is more difficult to justify the exception, because the principle is that financial loans are applied. So when we have a loan with an average life that is equal or higher than 2 years, and that loan is the purpose of that loan is investment in non-financial assets, then it is subject to. And in the mining sector, how do I justify it? A non-financial asset is exchange goods, used goods, and intangible. Under the concept of intangible, we will find the rights of mining property. You are receiving the funding from from a foreign country to buy a mining property, so you can justify it and you will be exempt from the legal reserve requirement. If you are receiving the funds because you are under the exploratory stage, you will justify as intangible for research and prospection, and not the exploitation. Exploitation, the mining itself, is not considered as an expense, as an expenditure, and so it is subject to the legal reserve requirement. The VAT, value added tax. You cannot use financial funds to cover the value-added tax, but there are exceptions in value-added tax in expenses related to exploration and survey, provided that expense in the VAT is activated, because we have no credit. So if we have no fiscal credit, it's not possible to fund it, but it's possible to justify it. Well, and there are some exceptions also when they are trusts, for example, energy trusts or negotiated obligations with public offer. And the last slide, what happens when I already received that loan and I want to pay it? To pay the loan, first I should have entered it. If I do not input the funds of the loan, I cannot repair it. It's the exchange channel. There is no exchange channel. I cannot pay it back because I did not enter. I did not input that money before. So everything that goes out of Argentina has to come into Argentina first. And there are some additional conditions in the loans. You cannot agree on loans where the capital can be paid before 365 days. Minimum, the capital has to be paid after 365 days. But financial loans for investments add the average life equal or higher than 2 years. So that is an additional condition. When do we need to enter the funds, to input the funds? You have a disbursement today and you have 365 days to input, to seed those funds. If you do not include those loans, can you pay interest? No. You only can pay interests if the disbursement happens today and after 48 hours the fund is coming into Argentina. If not, the interests are paid abroad. What happens if you received a loan and you did not account for it and you have to pay it? Well, one possibility, one alternative is through the capitalization. In other words, the concept that was a debt, that was a liability, make it become a capital. The minimum term for payback has some exceptions, and that are mentioned there. And lastly, all liability has to be communicated, has to be declared and filed to the central bank. This is for the companies that need funding, that are in an exploration stage. But what happens with the companies that are already producing, those that are exporting? Can they leave their foreign currencies abroad? But if they need the currency, if they need the money to operate here, what can they do? How do they enter it? In principle, the export of foreign currencies have to be entered in given terms. For example, the mineral products, 180 days, but you do not have the obligation to enter them. So you could agree different terms with your importer. So I give you 270, 365 days, and my importer pays abroad. I need the money. If I need the money, I bring the money back. I repatriate it as an export. I declare that income as a product or as a and if my exporter is drafting that fund, I could do it. But assume that my importer pays and I leave the money in a foreign account. And what concept should I bring the funds? And that is the point. I will have to bring that as a repatriation of assets I have abroad, as a saving I have abroad. And remember here that the legal reserve requirement is applied over the surplus of the $2 million. So an alternative to avoid that is when I bring the money to invest it again. If I brought the money as a working capital, they could not justify them as an investment. To summarize, the important thing is to know the standards, to know the rules, and the alternatives exist. There are alternatives, but you need to know how to play with them. There's nothing impossible. The numbers at the beginning had demonstrated that activity grew, the activity has funded itself, and it's just to let the foreign investor know that this activity is being funded by a foreign funding, which are the standards, and how is the funding done. Nothing is impossible, it's not difficult, and you are a sector that enjoys the benefits. The law is being applied, so it's just putting some goodwill to it, and it will work.